Right. Here we go. We got some people coming in here. It's interesting. If I follow you, I'm not zoomed in to where you're zoomed in.
You know what? Because I'm probably logged in 2 instances. So
okay.
So I'll sign out of that one.
Okay, got some people coming in. Thanks for joining, everyone. If you're dialed in through Zoom, if you can mute, that would be helpful. We can take some questions later, but. You could go on mute. The folks on the phone, we got some keyboard type in there. Just hit mute in the lower left corner. Istanbul. We got somebody from Turkey. Nice, perfect. See, I should be able to mute people as well too. We're going to get started in a couple minutes. Looks like folks are just coming in now.
Yeah, it looks like we're up to about 15. Great, thanks for joining. Yeah.
It's great.
Looks like everyone's winding down their day. I'm just starting mine here in California.
Right, yeah. What time is it there, Mark? 9:30? 10:30?
It's 10:30, yeah.
10:30.
Very, very civil hour to be joining.
Yeah, not too bad, right, yeah. Yeah, maybe these meetups are a good format for you because it's in the evening in the UK. You don't have to get up at 6 a.m.
That's right.
Vienna, I got somebody from Vienna. Columbus, Ohio. For the folks on the line, there's a chat built into the Zoom software that you can use to talk with each other. Right. We got to get people muted. Don't know who that is.
Oh, found it.
You found it? Okay.
Found it.
Okay.
All right, so I assume Mark will want to say a few words right up front, or do you want us just to kick off?
No, it's I'd just like to say thank you so much for doing this. I mean, a big fan of both of your work, and I really enjoyed reading your book. I was explaining to both Mark and Jim that we haven't done a great job of audio at this end, so I hope everyone can actually understand us, which is a big part of the book. It's definitely the tools. We need the tools. We've got a group here who in London, and we've got, we put it out there for as many people to join us, so hopefully some people will be joining. We've got people from Turkey, we've got people from everywhere. It's wonderful. So thanks again to all you guys as well for turning up. Hello from Saudi Arabia. It's brilliant. I think the format is going to be Jim and Mark are going to give us their insights and go through a bit of a talk on that end. And then afterwards, you guys are going to be around for a bit of a Q&A if people have questions.
Sounds good.
So I will mute and let you guys do the talking.
All right. Thanks for that, Mark.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Great to see everybody there in London at the meetup. And thanks everyone for joining online from around the world. I didn't realize we were going to have a global crowd here, but that's, it's par for the course. And we totally welcome that. My name is Jim Kalbach. I'm the head of customer experience at Mural. Mural is an online whiteboard. We're going to show that in a second. That's not what we want to talk about, though. We do want to talk about remote work a little bit in general, but in particular, remote design sprints. I myself have a design background. I've worked in UX teams, digital product design for a very, very long time before coming to Mural, and I work from my home office most of the time, and I've worked remotely for a lot of my career, trying to do design work, creative work remotely. My last job, I worked for Citrix, the makers of GoToMeeting. So I was looking at, remote collaboration in general. And now here at Mural, I look at how remote collaboration can be creative as well, too. I'm really, thrilled to be able to work with someone like Mark Tippin as well, too.
Yeah, that's great. So I, in my former lives, 25 plus years of design, graphic design, interaction design, CD-ROMs, and when those got crushed by the internet, moved over to Web 1.0, 2.0. My last gig was actually at Autodesk in San Francisco, and I was managing a highly distributed team, Tel Aviv, Toronto, Hyderabad, India, and was very frustrated with the fact that if you weren't in the headquarters office, you got relegated to just being told what to do. So I started looking for options probably about 5 years ago and stumbled across an early version of Mural. And that combined with going through a certification process with Luma Institute, that is a human-centered design kind of enabling consultancy, a lot of light bulbs came off, and I think it's so wonderful to be able to help people adopt tools and understand this transition from co-located work into distributed work. And I think Jim would share this belief that I have, that actually it's not just trying to be as good as co-located work. In many ways, the way you structure the work and the resources and talent that you can bring into a discussion becomes much better, in many ways less limited than a lot of times the work that's done co-located. So thanks, Mark, for inviting us to be here. Glad to share some of what we have. Our working hypothesis here is that everything we know about work is changing, where it's done, how it's done, and who does it. And if you haven't seen the book, this will be new to you. If you flip through the book, some of this will be a little bit of a repeat. We'll go through it at a quick clip. One of the way we anchor our discussion about transition from co-located to online is by focusing primarily on these three areas of the tools, the teams, and the techniques. Each one of these kind of has their own set of concerns and things that you need to look at. So the first one is just acknowledging that, teams have a shape. And, outside of the co-located team where everyone's physically in the same spot, they kind of fall into these general buckets. One is a split team. So this might be two major centers of activity, you know, a London office and a Paris office, and you're trying to coordinate between these two kind of large co-located teams. Another one is just mixed. You've got a center of gravity around one headquarters, and then you've got these remote employees. And this is kind of where I experienced things at Autodesk. Mostly one big center of activity with these kind of people trying to connect to this gravitational center. And then, you know, with a lot of the modern development teams, they start remote, they always are remote. Sometimes they've never even met each other in the same space. And so that, you know, that's kind of the third structure we see. And we've conducted an interview of Mural users every year for the last couple of years. And in the chat, if anyone has a guess, one, let us know what team shape kind of mimics the ones that you have. And we'll see if it matches kind of the statistics we see. So we see a couple mixed, remote, split, a lot of mixed.
Mixed and split.
Yeah, well, that kind of mimics, you know, our most recent results kind of indicated that, you know, split teams, about 10%, mixed teams, 60%, and then remote teams. The interesting note is the remote team is probably one of the largest growing sectors. And so I think where tools like Mural and Zoom with breakout rooms and all of this functionality that's helping remote teams is right on track to serve a huge unmet need. The other thing that I'll talk about briefly is techniques before we get into the tools. And you know, as a lead instructor with Luma, you know, there's a lot that you can do in a room with people. You can kind of read the energy in the room. You can have a side huddle. A lot of the natural things and tools that you've learned as a facilitator don't map 100%. The intent and the awareness is all wonderful. All of that stuff is really going to help you. But it's helpful to really kind of take a look at each thing and look at the tools that'll help you kind of before, during, and after a specific event. Sometimes we forget that in almost every case, it's the work you do up front before people get in the room that will really make the difference when you go to remote. I'm used to, in a Luma class, flying in the night before. I have an hour in the morning. I put up a bunch of stuff in the room and make sure everyone's got their Post-it notes, and we just start rocking and rolling. That's different with when you're doing stuff online. So you really need to be clear about looking at the tools, teams, and techniques, and making sure and testing methods in advance. And giving a place for people to connect, you know, either like a Slack channel in advance or something. And then when you're doing, when you're actually conducting the workshop, in a co-located workshop, sometimes you might be comfortable saying, all right, for the next half hour, we're just going to work on this thing. Well, those types of time chunks way too big to be effective in a remote situation, because you can't herd cats. You can't just kind of float around the room and keep everyone on track. So time boxing is really critical, breaking things down into 2-minute, 5-minute chunks so that everyone has an ability to kind of stay more or less in lockstep. Leveraging the fact that multitasking, right? Right now, anyone that's joining us remotely has probably got more than one screen up in front of them, right? So we leverage the chat. Yeah, exactly, Jim. Like I can see when he's paying attention to us and when there's something else happening, lots of fires going. But there's a way to leverage that. You know, you can have assign roles and have people spin up and say, you know, can you go find these documents in the internal shares that are relevant for our discussion? So make that ability to get access to other information part of the narrative. Doing things synchronously and asynchronously. You know, people fly in airplanes and come into a co-located workshop, and you feel obligated to keep them busy from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or later. Whereas when you're working remotely, you can actually break down what you would do in a 2-day workshop over the course of a week or two, and have time for people that need to think a little deeper to take that and bring those insights that happen maybe over the course of a day or two in between methods to bring that value back in. And always just be digitizing as you go. So you want to be making sure that anything you're coming up with is put into a space where people can get to it. Afterwards, just like, with Agile or design, you're thinking, testing, and you're learning. So even with this, there's a learning curve to it, and you're not going to get it right the first time, but make sure that you build in soliciting feedback. Have a part of the class where you can wrap up the business and then have a little meta conversation about how did this go? What worked well? Do we have sound and audio? Do we need to look at other tools so that every time you do one of these, you're actually learning and improving? So I think now I'm going to stop and hand it over to Jim for a bit. All right.
Thanks for that little intro. Just to continue a little bit of background here. Again, these are some points that we make in the book in much more detail. The tools, teams, and techniques. They're kind of the three areas that you have to think about differently. And you can use your sensibility for facilitating remote sprints face-to-face. That you don't throw that out the window. But I think that the bigger point here is you have to recalibrate things. So depending on your team situation and the shape, you might have to think a little bit differently about the interaction. The techniques, you also have to think a little bit differently. Time boxing everything, like Mark said, and working asynchronously. I put that in the chat. Where asynchronous work can be huge for thinking about how you're going to structure a design sprint as well too. And then the last thing that we like to advise people to think about are the tools. And of course, anything remote, anytime you talk about a remote design sprint or even this meetup right here, the communication, the interaction is going to be mediated by a set of tools. And it's really about thinking intentionally on what tools you're going to bring in to have that remote engagement. And we've identified, again, through our research and working with dozens of teams on remote design sprints and other types of remote collaboration, there's 5 basic functionalities or capabilities that you need to have. You need to be able to communicate in real time. And this is, right now we're using Zoom, so we have audio and video and screen sharing as well too. You need to be able to communicate asynchronously as well too. So that's your Slack chat and things like that. But also you can use the Zoom chat as we're using now. If you're using Skype or WebEx, most of those conference tools have some kind of chat function as well too. You also need to share content. So something like a Google Drive. Dropbox, if you're working inside of an organization, there might be a shared folder, but you may have files and documents and things that you need to share. And you also need to stay organized, so a project management tool, calendars, and things like that. But the last thing in this set of capabilities that we recommend, so when you're thinking about tools, we're not naming specific tools, we're just thinking of the types of things that you need your tool set to do. The last one is to be able to think and collaborate visually. And that's why, Mark and I are so excited to be part of Mural, is because from a creative standpoint, from a design standpoint, that's really what completes the circle. And really, in my opinion, now something like a remote design sprint is actually now imaginable, because we don't only have the audio and the video and the screen sharing and the chat and things like that, but we can actually do our design sprint work on a board, a canvas, where you can lay things out visually and have a discussion like you would at a whiteboard. So putting all of these things together, and you as the facilitator, so we're kind of speaking to everybody here as if they're a facilitator, or at least helping to facilitate as well too. Kind of thinking how these things work together, these tools work together, is really how you then get that engagement that you need from the team, and that you can, as Mark said, hopefully even move faster than a co-located team, or get better results than a co-located team. And we've seen that, with design sprints that we've done as well too, that you can, if all of this is working together and you have the team set up and the technique set up right, you can actually move faster and even get to a better result than you might in face-to-face. Now, we're not saying don't ever do a face-to-face remote design sprint. I mean, we're fans of that as well too, and we'll fly around the world, halfway around the world to be face-to-face. But the reality of our organizations and our situations are such that we have to be effective and efficient and able to function and still deliver quality results with remote teams. That's just the nature of our organizations more and more. So thinking about the tool set intentionally, super, super important. And we believe that, Mural really adds a keystone in this circle of collaboration tools. I call this the digitally defined workspace. So I just wanted to take a quick pause just to demo Mural quickly, so that you can see that visual whiteboard capability. We are using Mural for this presentation, and you can see us kind of zooming and panning around. But I just wanted to show quickly, just show a mural so you can see what we mean when we say an online whiteboard for folks who aren't familiar with Mural. And I'm just going to switch back out to a room. So we were inside of a mural, and you can think of Mural like a canvas or a board or a wall that you can access right through your browser. So it's cloud-based technology. You just need a link. You don't even need to download an app, although we do have some native apps. You can also use Chrome, your browser. And then we have an organization system with rooms. And I'm in a room here that we set up. I'm just going to go ahead and hit Create New Mural so you can see what it's like when you first come into a tool like Mural. And there are other tools that do similar type of whiteboarding out there. Obviously, we're fans of Mural. So when you create a mural, it's blank. And you can think about Mural, again, like a canvas or a board or a wall. And you navigate around it like you would Google Maps. You zoom and pan in and out, and you move around left and right. So you can see here I have an untitled mural. And murals are bounded, but you can make them larger if you want. So you can just drag and make those larger. And then what you can do is I'm zooming in a little bit. I'm using my mouse to zoom. You can also use your trackpad. On the left-hand side, there are some content options. So if we wanted to do, how might we make remote teams feel closer? I don't know if you can join me in here, Mark. Maybe we can do a little brainstorming session.
You bet, hopping over.
Okay. So I can also then pull elements from the left-hand side and just drop and drag those anywhere. We don't prescribe a format. It's basically a blank open sheet that you can add thoughts to. So I like this one, same flowers, different offices. How about a remote happy hour? I guess it might be early for someone at some place to do a happy hour. But we could do that, like virtual hack weeks. So I can get some idea, or hack day maybe. I can get some ideas out once I add a sticky note. I can change the color of it, so it's digital, so you can change any properties that you have. You can also connect things together, for instance, with arrows and connectors. We have some squares and shapes. We also have a full set of icons that taps into the noun project, if you're familiar with the noun project here. So if I want to get an icon for sprint, I could do that here. Remote design sprint. But again, in essence, you get a large canvas that you zoom and pan around, and you can add content to in any order. But it's not just about text. We also have an image search, and you can upload images and files. So I had this image on my desktop. I can just drag that and drop that right in the browser, so I can add images. This is really good for sketching and working with screenshots and things like that, which you may be doing in a design sprint. But I can also upload files, PDFs, and other things as well too. There's also a drawing capability. Mark's showing that right now. What are you using to draw, Mark? Do you have an iPad or?
I wish. I'm on the fly. I'm just using a magic touchpad and my finger.
Okay.
I do have a pen-shaped mouse I recently discovered, which is actually works pretty well. But there are lots of different devices.
Right. So drawing, images, documents, URLs, you can bring that all together in Mural. And this becomes your canvas. This becomes your board that you can actually structure the agenda of a design sprint. And we have some examples of some coming up where you go left to right and you're basically moving through your day or your multi-day session that you have. So that's just a brief overview of Mural. I just wanted to orient people to what we're using here and what we're going to be showing in a second, so you know where this came from. Again, we're using Mural to present from here. So if I zoom all the way out, you can see this large mural that Mark and I have pre-formatted for this presentation. And that's really a key recommendation that we have when you're doing a remote design sprint. It's all in the preparation. So think about the tools, think about the team, think about the techniques, but also map out your agenda using a tool like Mural or whatever you're going to be. Even if you're using Google Docs, just map it out in advance. It's going to make the remote design sprint way, way, way more efficient and it will flow better if you think about it. In other words, what you don't want to do with a remote group is open up a blank canvas or a document and say, okay, we're going to start filling that out. that you really need to have that focus kind of pre-baked into your artifacts. And then also, as Mark said, time box everything. So set a timer for everything. Think about how much time everybody's going to need. Putting a timer on when you're with a remote group puts a sense of urgency on that activity in that moment, and you're going to have less people, their attention is going to stay with you rather than evaporating, which can happen really, really quickly with a remote group. So let's just go through, Mark talked about before, during, and after. Let's just go through, and we have some examples. And we want to show you how you might set up a remote design sprint. It's kind of thinking of before, during, and after. And I'm going to talk about some of the logistics. Kind of started that conversation already. When you're planning and managing a remote design sprint, you want to put a lot of attention into the preparation. And in particular, prepare participants. Not just prepare them for the topic of the design sprint, the challenge, and things like that. Hopefully you're doing that already anyway. But really prepare them for the environment in which they're going to be working, and send out very, very explicit emails and discussions, right? So you might do something like this. This is a calendar invitation, right? Where you're going to say, hey, team, we're going to be doing this. Please complete the pre-work. I'll talk about pre-work in a second, because you can work asynchronously, remotely, easier almost, that we actually recommend. Try to do as much as you can up front asynchronously, right? And be very, very clear about what tools they need. Do they need Chrome? What are the requirements that they're going to need to be able to operate in the remote design sprint, and then have a full discussion, the description rather, of the design sprint as well too. We do recommend pre-work and setting people up with assignments ahead of time. So assign homework in advance, have them introduce themselves, have them get into the topic of the sprint as much as possible in advance. So that means you're going to have to introduce the tools, and you're going to have to give people instructions on where to go. So you'll see in this email down here, it says download Zoom. If you're using Zoom, then make sure everybody can download Zoom. If you're using a Mural or a Google Doc for the activities, make sure you have that set up in advance and be very, very explicit. So a lot of preparation, a lot of intentional thought into the communication that goes out to the participants as well. Don't assume that everybody can get into Zoom. Don't assume that everybody's going to be able to find where your artifacts are. And try to set up some pre-work, right? So I'm just going to talk a little bit about pre-work, and then I'm going to hand it over to you, Mark. And I think you have a good example from a design sprint that we just conducted last week or the week before. We like to use Mural for the pre-work. So what we do is we set up a series of murals in a room. So Mural has a structure of a workspace, rooms within that workspace, which are like folders, and then murals, that's where the content is. What we recommend doing is setting up a room for the design sprint, and you can have multiple murals in there. One of them would be a pre-work mural, right? And you can see here in this room over here on the right, there was a pre-work mural. Again, in that communication to the participants, what you want to do is say, go into that mural and finish the activity. Now that activity is set up already. And even if you're using Google Docs or something else, set up the activity. So all the person has to do is find their name or find the empty slot that they have to fill out to introduce themselves or start contributing content. That's all set up. You direct them there, have them do the pre-work in advance. That'll save a lot of time. Typically, when you're working with a remote team, attention spans are shorter. I can run a multi-day workshop face-to-face where everybody's in the same room and pretty much engage everybody for that whole time. I don't recommend doing 2 8-hour sessions that are completely remote back-to-back, right? It's going to be hard for people to have that much attention when you're in a remote setting. So you want to maximize your together time and do as much as you can in advance, so that when you get together on a Zoom or Skype or Google Hangouts, whatever you use, that you're really using that time to really talk about the decisions that the group has to make together. So pre-work is huge for offloading work from that real-time session before and after. We'll talk about after as well too. So setting up a pre-work mural, here's an example of one where it's set up with little zones and you tell people to go claim one of those boxes. You can see the boxes here on the right. What we would do is say, claim one of those boxes and respond to the prompts in those boxes. Orient people to the session, provide resources for them to read in advance. In fact, you could even do lightning talks if you had them recorded. You could say, watch all these lightning talks. You don't have to do lightning talks in real time. So there's a lot of things that you can do in advance. So one of the big questions I like to think about with remote design sprints is how much of it can you do asynchronously before the real-time sprint begins, and use tools like Mural to start the conversation even before the conversation starts. What I'd like to do is ask Mark. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask Mark to show us what we did as pre-work for a design sprint that we just did with Moleskine. So Mural and Moleskine teamed up with for a design sprint, and we'll show you some of this in terms of the pre-work Mural. So over to you, Mark.
Okay, sounds good. Let me know when you can see my screen.
We got you.
Okay, so just so people can follow the context, I'm going to show a couple different tabs here. So one of the nice things is you can run multiple murals in different tabs when you're using the browser. So the first thing I wanted to show is here's the room that we set up for a 2-day design sprint with Moleskine. And if you're not familiar, the Moleskine we're talking about is the notebook manufacturer, but they also have a smart device, pen with a little camera in the end that uses encoded paper, and you can draw on the paper. And so we're looking at opportunities to kind of blend this analog and digital world. And we had a team, including engineers, product management from Mural, but then also design leads, marketing leads from Moleskine as well that tried to come together. So the room was set up and Mural's prepped in advance. In this tab, I'll walk us around a little bit the Mural that we used for pre-work. So this was shared with everyone several days in advance, and it solved a couple challenges with new teams coming together. First and foremost, there were shared technology that we needed to kind of get a grip on. So we were able to provide links to, for the Mural folks, the Moleskine stuff that they'd need to play around with, and for the Moleskine folks, the Mural stuff they need to play around with. And then in advance, we consolidated just the highlights around the two technologies. So here are links to articles, videos, this kind of stuff, so people could start learning and gaining a little empathy about the world, the language, all this, kind of immersing ourselves into the other team's world and space. In addition to that, links to PowerPoint files, research that both companies had done so that we could really come into this session together well prepared. Another thing that it did is it allowed everyone on the team to get to know each other. So you drop in a photo of yourself, you do a little sketching, since this was kind of focused on being visual. Everyone did a little bit of sketching, and then we asked some questions related to the challenge we're going to work together on. And then this became a way for us as facilitators to kind of read the room and get a sense of concerns and what's top of mind for people. And it was still a couple days to tweak the flow of the actual workshop if we needed to. So pre-work does a lot for you. And then the last step is absolutely focused everyone on the specific task we're doing, makes them aware of how we're going to be working together over 2 days, and introduces the two personas that we're going to be working with. So, so again, the pre-work there really does a lot of the heavy lifting, and it allows you a lot of comfort as a facilitator to get a sense of where people are at before you have to kind of kick off the session and make sure any last minute pivoting you have to do can happen. Yeah, so I think, yeah, it was fun. It was a great example. So I think I'll stop.
Yeah, we're gonna switch screens here a couple times. So that's just par for the course.
Yep.
You got my screen, Mark?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay. So that's kind of before, and we can't stress enough how important the preparation is for any larger remote interaction, like a remote design sprint, multi-day design sprint. That's all remote. But so if you're a facilitator during the session, here are some of our key recommendations. One is around just timing in general. Starting on time is really important, particularly if you have that mixed situation. If there's folks in the room, people who are dialed in, if they're just watching people assemble in the room for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, those become really, really long time, a long time. So it might seem casual for a group of people in an office or in a room to kind of get together and take their time. But when you're remote, the start time, you want the start time to be a lot quicker as well too. So just realize that there's going to be a different perception about the start time, whether you're face-to-face or remote. And this is more in the mixed situation that we were talking about. But time boxing, that's kind of a made up word. If you don't know the word time box, basically means use your timer for everything, for every conversation. Say, we're going to discuss this for 2 minutes. We're going to do a heads down exercise for 3 minutes. And we do recommend chunks that small. 1 minute to 5 minutes, small chunks. Don't say, hey, we're gonna do something for 20 minutes and put a timer on for 20 minutes with a remote group. You're gonna lose their attention about halfway. Rather, take that activity and break it into small things. You can always add more time. If you say, oh crap, 2 minutes wasn't enough, add another minute. If that's not enough, add another minute. So err on making those chunks smaller and then add time on top if you need to do that as well too. But have a timer. Mural has a timer built in as well too, but you can just use a phone and do it that way. Start with again, this is where your sensibility for facilitating workshops, that doesn't go away. So warm up the group. Do it. What can you do remotely? We have a great blog post out there, and I'll share it in the chat, or maybe Mark, you can find it too. We collected a series of about 20 or more warm-up exercises and energizers that can be done completely remotely. Don't skip that. You can do that remote as well too. Set the ground rules. Direct traffic, anybody who's been on a conference call before knows that people talk over each other, right? And you might need some turn taking and traffic directing cues. Sorry, there, I got a browser tab that popped up. You might need to take turns, for instance. One thing, just as an example, one thing that I like to do, that we like to do as a team, is the last person who spoke then picks the next person to go. If you're going to do a readout with the whole group, then I would say, oh, Mark, you're next. And then Mark would pick the next person, and then that person would pick the next person. That's a great way to get everybody to know everybody's name and to make sure everybody talks. So you have to come up with ways to direct traffic that aren't as clumsy as a lot of conference calls can be. And try to maintain engagement. Mark talked about multitasking. A lot of people are offended by multitasking and want to avoid it at all costs. Well, first of all, I'm just not offended by it, because I know all of you guys on the call right now have at least checked your email probably half a dozen times while I'm talking here. That's fine. But what you want to do is you want to engage people as well too, and turn that multitasking into energy back into the group. So leverage multiple channels, right? Have a chat going, have the video going, have a document open, and get the team to be able to move between those as much as possible. And that multi-channel rich experience is what's going to keep the engagement high. So bake that into your technique as well too. So your technique should incorporate lots of different senses, the remote senses, right? The chat sense, the audio sense, the documenting sense, and so forth. One big thing though, just wanted to talk about breakout rooms. Really, really challenging with a breakout with a remote team. And the challenge there is the audio channel, right? Because right now we're in a Zoom call. If I said, okay, let's break up into fours, and everybody, talk about something in a group of 4 or 5 people with this group right here, where are you going to go? What are you guys going to do? How are you going to talk? Because right now there's only one audio channel. Tools like Zoom, WebEx has it. Some of the other conferencing tools have what's called breakout rooms, where you can actually break the audio channel. And you stay in the same session, but it's just broken up, and then you can come back together. But learning how to facilitate breakout rooms with a remote team is something you should practice in advance, and something that's possible and super, super, super effective, but often not what people think it's going to be as easy as it's going to be. Sometimes it's like herding cats to get people to come back and things like that. So you can do breakout rooms. Rely on technology like Zoom to help you do that, but just realize that experience is going to be slightly different when you're working remotely. So Mark, I'm going to stop sharing again. We're going to flip again. And why don't you show us from the Moleskine Design Sprint, kind of the breakout rooms and the murals that we set up there.
All right, sounds good. All right, let me know when you can see my...
We got you, yep.
Okay, so what I wanted to first show is that each day there were 3 murals that were used. One we call a presentation mural, and that's kind of the facilitator's, the equivalent of a deck that the facilitator would use to kind of lay out the structure. And it's also where any activities that happen in plenary, where everyone's coming together and working at the same time, that's kind of where those activities happen. So on this first mural, this is where you'd lay out the agenda, you kind of have your warm-ups, and kind of lay out any of the ground rules, any things that you need to make people mindful of throughout the session. Then you have your activities. As you can see, this is the result of the work done. So working individually in time-box manners, and then shifting from individual note observation making into affinity clustering is a real common way to get teams to start understanding themes and kind of doing that divergent thinking, and then going through a series of work leading up to the point where teams break out. And so I mentioned we had 3 murals. The first one, this overarching mural that kind of holds the entire day of sprint work together, but then there are 2 individual murals, one for each team. So while we would use Zoom and breakout rooms to control the audio and video for the 2 teams, we also had 2 separate murals to link them to, and this is where the teams basically are sprinting through their design work in parallel. And as you can see, the mural is long and horizontal, and we kind of work from left to right, doing things like filling out and understanding the personas a little bit better, developing challenge statements around the individuals and the portions. The challenge was, how could we use analog and digital technology around a design sprint? So it was a bit meta. We were having a design sprint talking about how to improve a design sprint or run it virtually. So as you can see, you pre-populate a lot of this area and then leave room for people to kind of carry on their work. And again, since this was an incredibly compressed time sprint, it was 2 4-hour sections, the upfront prep was really critical. At a certain point, we had to come up with ways to ideate. So each team, we did crazy 8s. As you can see, some people were, full analog and then taking pictures and uploading them, whereas other people were drawing online. We can take a peek at what the team 2 look like, and you can see teams are working in parallel, but some of the outcomes are different and varied. And this is one of the things that's really amazing, is the people you can get from anywhere, the right resources into one conversation, that will take on the same challenge and come up with very different ways to look at it. Ending with a storyboard here where borrowed images really focused on the kind of the feeling that people had at different moments of the journey, whereas Team 1, I think, was much more, their results were very much more in the format of a rigorous storyboard. And then there was a whole separate mural for day 2, which kind of picked up the storyboarding and actually is where people did the lifting around creating prototypes. And then we invited people into the environment and had people run through the prototypes and did think aloud testing as well, right within the mural.
Great.
Yeah.
So we just got a couple more points to make, and then we'll take some questions. So Mark, maybe we can just wrap up with the wrap up.
Yeah, that seems like a good place. So so again, you've done a lot of work. You've made sure people know they've got the tools, where they need to be, set the expectations, and you've done this big effort. And it'd be a big mistake just to kind of walk away from it at that point. It's really important at the end of any one of these sessions, especially in a remote situation, to build in time to actually reflect and get that feedback. All right. you won't be aware, for example, if your microphone was horrible through the entire thing or was scratchy, unless at the end, you can get this kind of feedback and understand how to make small tweaks. But then also people have usually, really insightful things to say about perhaps the order of methods or the structure of a conversation that are really valuable. And if you just kind of hang up the phone and everyone goes in their separate ways, you really miss out on, incredibly useful information to make the process better. You do want to make sure also that any of this material that you've done is summarized and shared if you have stakeholders that need to be informed, or if there is materials that were generated that need to be kind of tweaked and then made available for further research or to filter back up to project management or executive, however that works. You want to make sure that you build in time to do that and have a connection to the people that made the material in case you have questions. If this is something where you're maybe doing multiple workshops or multiple sessions with different groups, this is also a good time to kind of reset all the links, move things back into a starting position, make sure that the rooms and links and all that stuff are set up. And maybe if this was a first pass and it was pretty solid, or you make the tweaks to it, there's an opportunity to actually turn that into a template. Much like a Word template or an Excel template, it's a way to turn this kind of ready to go, pre-baked thing into something where you can just double click and start a session with everything in place and ready to go from a template. And I think, Jim, you had if we have time, I don't know how we're doing on time.
Well, we're actually a little bit over. Yeah, sorry. I hope that was interesting for everybody. We do want to open it up from questions. I put a couple of links to some blog posts about this case study here, and I'll just let you read that on your own. We worked with Joe Laley from PwC, from PricewaterhouseCoopers. And he's been doing remote design sprints for a while, and he's got some really great, real world advice that you can read there. I also put a link to this mural in the chat. Sorry, this is where the people online actually have an advantage to the people in the room because they're getting all this great content. So Mark, we'll have to send this out afterwards to the folks there in the room. But I put a link to this mural that we're presenting from as a view only link. So you guys can take a look at that. But just as a final word, and then we do want to open it up for questions. Our final thought is really having what we call a digital first mindset, and that's thinking about the digital component to your sprint, even if it's face-to-face for that matter, but particularly if it's remote. Think about how you're going to interact digitally. Do that first, and then if it's face-to-face or there's any physical component to it, it's usually easier to downgrade to a physical experience once you have that digital experience set up. And just a quick example of that is, very often you do a face-to-face workshop and then you dump, and I heard somebody say this the other day, they dump photos or dump transcriptions of sticky notes on a wall, physical sticky notes on a wall. They dump it into some file or some folder. Don't dump. Think in advance. What's your next step? And thinking digitally first, the answer is always going to be it needs to be digitized if it's important, right? So set that up in advance. Set up a mural, set up a document, have the next steps already set up, thinking about that. So if you're thinking digital from the very beginning, your follow-through is usually going to be better. And, we see remote work and remote sprints. It's not a burden. It's not like, oh, crap, I have to do this remote design sprint. I'm never going to be able to do it. It's actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity to engage people who you normally wouldn't engage. It's an opportunity to collect lots of different voices together. And, with a little bit of practice, you can actually be faster and more efficient as well, too. And we think this is the future, is the digital first mindset. So, Mark, I'd like to open it up, Mark Gardner in the room there, to some questions. Sorry for being so long-winded.
No. I can, to be honest, to listen to this for hours. It is super, and I love the examples as well. It'd be great sometimes just to probably just go through, because there's obviously so many different ways of doing it. I'll just open it up with a question, which was, obviously when you facilitate in real, you can pick up on those more of the emotions. How do you deal with that in this virtual world?
Any thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, I liked what Jim taught me early on working together is you got to be an air traffic controller. You got to direct traffic. And because in many cases, the quiet voices that are quiet in a room will even be more silent online. And so using tools available to you, like in Zoom, you've got a list of participants. So just march down there and say, what do you think, Lindsay? What do you think, Tom? What do you think? You know, and then as a facilitator, you're not only moving things forward, but then you're listening and you're saying, like, is this person on or off, or are they checked out? Are they, where are they at? And that's where the kind of a tool to get that facilitation empathy with the individuals.
Yeah, and I also think the warm-up that I mentioned, but also reflection. Mark talked a little bit about reflection, to actually bake that in. And we've done energizers after a break. By the way, we do recommend building in breaks where you actually get away from the computer for 5 minutes. Typically, when we come back from a great break, we do an energizer or a reflection where people can, and sometimes it's how are you feeling, what's your mood, and things like that as well too. So if you if you build in those touch points where you can stop and reflect, maybe a little bit more often, you'll get a sense of that as well too. But you know, just even something like webcams, like you can see me talking with my hands crazy over here. Like you can get a lot of emotion from webcams, but also the activity and things that people are doing on screen as well too. I think it's a little bit more of like an ESP kind of sense. But once you start working with a remote team, you can pick up on small things like did that person use a smiley face after their sentence? Are they sarcastic or not? And you know, picking up on little cues like that becomes a skill in and of itself.
Yeah, you mentioned that about using emojicons and using things like that as extra things.
Yeah.
Using the webcam for thumbs up.
Thumbs up, I do it all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, okay, so getting that out, I really like that. Just one question from me, and then I know I've got some questions here in the room.
We got some online too.
Yeah, one of them was about always digitizing, and I totally agree, but it must be difficult facilitating and also digitizing, keeping all of these assets and artifacts together. Do you sometimes have like a dual facilitation or a co-facilitator, or would you recommend something like that?
Yeah.
Almost always. That's like a requirement to have at least 2 facilitators. It could be a lead, and then what I call a producer, a workshop producer. It could just be somebody in the background. Or it could just be a hat that the participant wears as well too. By the way, we like to assign roles. That's for a remote setting, that's actually really important that people have different hats. Oh, you're the timekeeper, you're the note taker, and you can switch those roles and things like that. But sometimes you have to be very, very explicit, even more explicit with remote teams on those roles. But we like to go in with a couple of people, maybe 1 or 2 main facilitators and 1 or 2 people helping in the background.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where the secondary channel is critical. We've done a couple public workshops and public activities, and setting up a Slack channel or some way for people in the week beforehand, all the way down to like the 5 minutes where they can't find the elevator and they're lost in a hallway to get to the event. It's that zero friction, you know, on-ramp to the experience. That channel is so critical. Once the show's running, everyone's in Zoom and everything, but then having that second person to be able to help the individual cases with connection issues or something, super important, so that the bulk of the room and focus can move forward and not everything tanks just because.
And Mark and I just did that. While he was talking, I was engaging the folks on chat in Zoom, and then vice versa. So we were kind of tag teaming that front stage, backstage role hat wearing.
Okay, okay, cool. I've got a question in the room. So this is?
Yeah, my name's Damien. I've got 1.5 questions. I don't know who's driving the screen, but could you scroll left a little bit?
Sure, I think it's me.
I think it's still you, yeah.
Yeah, so you mean here? More?
No, further left. And further left again.
Okay.
Okay, under early and often. Yeah, so my first question was, what's the ideal schedule for a remote design sprint? We run sort of 3-hour sessions over 2 weeks. We run 3 or 4 3-hour sessions over 2 weeks. And I'm just wondering what you feel is ideal. And the half question is, under early and often, what is treasure hunts?
Oh, yeah. So in many cases, and Mark, if you give me, thank you. In many cases, you might have groups working individually, and in every situation, you're going to have a team that kind of finishes before others. And in a public workshop or a co-located workshop, that's usually where the one team that's just rushing to get it done so they can get back to their phones and check out. You see the same thing happening online, but if a team is early, sprinkle things for them to find. And on breaks, perhaps you can put links to interesting related topics and have everyone on a 15-minute break say, go find out something you didn't know, and you have a warm-up exercise, which is just having people share back something they didn't know or an insight that they found. So treasure hunts is kind of the sprinkling the environment with things to keep it relative and engaged when people are finishing and completing things at a different pace.
And to your I love those ideas, and that gets to that multitasking. Like he said, use multitasking to your advantage. Is like go out and read this article, go out and find things for ourselves. But to your first question, on ideal schedule, and we had can you mute Mark? Sorry, just getting a little bit of echo. Yep, thanks. We had a question here about running like 5 day sprints. Well, first of all, are people still doing 5-day sprints? I mean, I heard the word on the street is 5-day sprint is a 4-day sprint is a 3-day sprint is kind of the thing that people are doing these days. So I don't even recommend a 5-day face-to-face sprint anymore. But when you're online, and I didn't know the name of the person who asked the question, I think you kind of hinted at it. Smaller chunks, typically for me, a 4-hour session, I can engage a team for 4 hours without much thought. You can go a little bit longer, but I find that you don't want to do, when you say 2-day sprint and it's remote, you don't want to do 2 full 8-hour days. That's usually 2 4-hour days, and then you might need to come back together for another one. So the shape of the sprint tends to be, the idea of a sprint is you get together and you're face to face for 3 days. So it's vertical. It's 3 8-hour days, right? But a remote sprint tends to be spread out a lot more. That you're going to do a lot more asynchronous work. And then when you're together, you're going to be thinking 2 3 4-hour chunks. So you might have to do a couple more of those, but spread out a little bit longer, and then even more follow-up work as well too. But for me, my rule of thumb is a 4-hour session is generally at the point where people can be engaged for a good stretch of time.
Holly, we have another question here in the room. This is?
Hello, my name's Richard. Just an observation, I think the example you showed with us works really well for the first 2 days of the design sprint. So more of the understanding the challenges, the how might we's, doing the crazy eights. In terms of your experience of doing the rest of the design sprint, particularly in the prototyping, what's your tools of choice? Is it InVision? Is it Figma? Is it Principle? And how does Mural help with the second half of the taking the ideas, prototyping and sharing it and getting people's feedback?
Yeah. You got any thoughts there, Mark? Or?
Yeah, so in my experience, it's it's whatever works and whatever the team is comfortable with. I've seen paper prototyping scanned and then those assets placed, storyboarding, user journey maps, even scripted dialogues if you're working out kind of a protocol. So the way that Mural supports that, a number of ways, front stage, backstage. So front stage, there's a way for you to bring a test subject into an area, and if it's a storyboarded type of procedural thing, you can say, set the context and say, you're looking and what you see is here in screen 1, and they say, okay, I click this button and go, okay, now skip to screen 7. This is the state you see, right? So there's can be very low fidelity ways to walk people through that experience. On the backstage side, if you have multiple researchers that are observing, that's where you can kind of matrix people into something where one researcher is looking at body language, someone else is looking at key feature use or discoverability or something. And Mural is a brilliant way to kind of have people capture notes in real time, and then even between, a morning session and an afternoon session, the team can go right back into this artifact that's created in real time and look and say, okay, do we need to change the protocol a little bit? Would that help us get over some of these obvious clunks in the road to get better input in the second one? I don't know, Jim.
No, it's a great observation, and I think you're absolutely right that, if we're just looking at, Mural itself, you're going to have a lot of Mural up front, and then you'll see, towards the, prototyping and testing phases of your sprint later on, you're probably going to start bringing in things like InVision, which is
Right.
great. I love InVision for sprints in general. And, you take those sketches, you can mock them up, and then you can show that to a participant. That's fantastic. And I think where Mural then continues to be relevant is exactly what Mark said, is collecting the feedback from whoever you're testing that with in Mural. So then because presumably after you do some kind of prototyping and testing, you're then going to get back together as a remote team and have some kind of discussion, prioritization. What, do we move forward? Do we stop this concept? Do we move on? Whatever those decisions are and whatever that sense making is. And if everybody put their thoughts out into Mural, then you can take it to the next step, clustering, prioritization, decision, and you can finish off in Mural. But you're right, there are other tools, obviously, that will come into play. And that's part of that tool set that you need to think about. So if you're going to use InVision, does everybody have access to it who needs it, right? Even just warning people, maybe they're not going to use it, like a business stakeholder, but you can tell them we're going to be using InVision in the sprint. You can set that up in advance.
That's right. And we use Marvel internally to try and prototype stuff quickly, and then you just plunk the link to the experience, and yet the team, product management and CX and everyone that's having a discussion, they click on that resource, go walk through it, and then the discussion about likes, dislikes, improvements happens and is captured in Mural. High transparency as well. I don't think we touched on that specifically, but that's one of the huge benefits here is, the ability to share these things in a view-only mode. So maybe you have stakeholders that you don't want them mucking with what you're doing, but you also avoid a lot of, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? If you just give them a link and they can come and see at any time, especially during a live session when people are working.
There's another one. I think it was someone asked this in the questions online, and something I also find quite interesting. The pre-work falls to the person who's going to be facilitating the this process, and I think a key takeaway is that there's more sprint work than there is almost sprint work, and the success is in that work. Have you got any resources or things you'd recommend for people looking into this pre-sprint preparation?
It's a good idea. Do we have anything, Mark? I mean, there's some things in the book, but not necessarily resources.
It's kind of, in my experience, it's been a bit bespoke. It's like, it really depends on if you're doing a product versus a service versus, it's sometimes it's just a ton of reading that needs to happen up front and yearly. Sometimes it's competitive marketing analysis stuff, and so you're watching videos or positioning statements, or you're reading, so I don't know that there's kind of one size fits all kind of pre-work thing. But having a general kind of get to know you, if the team's new, there's definitely an element of how do we come together as a team? How do we know?
Exactly. We do have some kickoff templates in Mural, but it's a great question, and you just got me thinking. Like, no, we should have something to answer your question right away, Mark. So you just gave it to you for somebody on my team.
So maybe there's something for you guys as well out there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Another one you just said about people on the team. Have you any experience with whether a design sprint works better with people who have previously worked together, especially under this kind of concept of a design sprint, as it were? So people who have this kind of funk, they've worked together, they understand it, or if that's even important, like a purely remote team who's never met can be equally as creative.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's more challenging. One of the recommendations that I have for remote work in general is meet face to face. It's weird because I talk about remote work all the time, and one of the recommendations I have is meet face to face. It's like, Jim, you were just talking about remote work. Why are you saying meet to face to face? But remote work is so much easier if you've met the person face to face. Then you can interpret that emoji in a different way because you know how they are. It's like, oh, that's Mark. He's just being sarcastic, right? So that face to face interaction goes a long way. However, it is possible to get a group of strangers together remotely and do multi-day, multi-hour sprint. That's where things like the warm-ups become super, super important. The pre-work, the introductions. And it's not just about introducing yourself and filling out a form. You can also do exercises like comment on the other participants, or go look at their LinkedIn profiles, because they put a link in there as well too. So try to get that interaction going before you even come together. But if you've never met before, take a significant amount of time to get to understand each other and how this remote thing is going to work.
Yeah, I would say, embracing that asynchronous and breaking things up too, almost like do a super intense 90-minute pre-sprint sprint. And maybe there's some valuable work that happens in there, but in the process of coming together and listening to each other and accepting roles, you're going to learn a lot. Like this sprint that we did with Moleskin, we had some interesting outcomes that actually may blossom into viable business. But for me, the value of that compressed time we spent together is I have a much better empathy for who they are and how they work and the way they work. And almost I wished we could have done like just a super tight 2-hour before we get into really trying to embrace the work that has to have value, as just a way to understand how do we work together.
I also, that's a great point, Mark. Just one quick story. About 3 years ago, we were working with Jeff Gotthelf, the author of Lean UX. We were trying to take his curriculum and be able to do it remotely, which we successfully did. And one thing I learned from that was, again, under this rubric of maximize together time, what I was doing was actually a pre-sprint call. So pretty much what you just said, Mark, was I took the group and we had a call that wasn't the sprint. It was just it was a call about the sprint where we did some warm-up activities. We introduced ourselves. I introduced the topic, the rules of engagement. I debugged everybody's technology. Your headset's not going to work. You can't log into Mural, whatever that was. We had an hour call. It could even be a half an hour call where we just got together ahead of the actual sprint itself. And we just did this kind of introduction, debugging, getting to know each other session that was for itself and by itself, right?
Okay, I'm very conscious that you guys, it's been an hour now. I mean, I'm sure I could talk to you all night, or all day.
We could probably talk all night too. We're
Honestly.
conscious of you guys there because it's late at night. You had a beer or two already, right?
There was one more. What was the one? There's another question there I've just seen from someone here.
There's one online.
Yeah, that was one I was trying to get to.
And the question online is about doing storyboarding and doing some of the work remotely or virtually, but then when it really comes to the storyboarding, doing it in person at a whiteboard. I think that part can be a little tricky. There is a drawing capability built into Mural, and I've done some real-time kind of visual facilitation, but it requires equipment like a Surface tablet or something with really intuitive pen input. But yeah, that whiteboard, that ability to have 3 or 4 people hovered around something in the side of your hand saying, no, not that emotion, it's this, and this kind of collaborative artists working together. That would be tricky. I think for me, my instinct would be to allow people to do a quick cut, like Timebox, a quick cut at a storyboard, and then do kind of a rose thorn bud analysis on, because different people are going to tell the story a different way, find the highs and lows and the mode of the storytelling in an aggregate way, and then do it in a really rough way before you actually worry about kind of a more tight final, more professional or tighter looking storyboard. That's all I got.
Yeah, that's a great answer. But it does actually bring up a really interesting point about hybrid sprints as well too, because it might not be the situation that you can't not be together, but rather that together time is limited to a day. Right? So you can do a lot of what we talked about, the asynchronous work and even a synchronous online session, and then you're together for a day, and then they do some of the follow-up. So you can actually, this is what we were talking about. When you think about technique, you really got to think about how you can blend synchronous and asynchronous, face-to-face and online as well too, and have components of both physical and digital kind of mixed into your agenda.
Just one last one. There's a picture in the middle of this, the mural canvas that we have at the moment, with a girl looking like she's got a virtual reality headset. This is kind of a fantasy thing. Where do you see that at some point? VR, we can all pretend to be in a room, but I mean, have you any thoughts on that or experience with that?
There are a couple vendors that are pitching this right now. And Microsoft, I just saw a video from some of their kind of virtual holographic stuff that's very interesting. It's still, for me, I think, I was at Autodesk way back when Vermal came out and the web was trying to figure out what to do with 3D and virtual, you know, before Second Life and all that stuff. And I think there's still just this awkwardness to the whole wearing a headset that just gets in the way. I think right now it really depends on what you're trying to do. If you're really trying to get ideas out and evaluate them, find patterns, make decisions, this kind of meta representation is fine. There's some interesting tools that, Jim, you just shared a link. Was it a Coco or I can't remember the name of the link, but they basically allow you to set up a virtual office with a basic floor plan, and people log in and you kind of move your avatar in and out of rooms, and it kind of does what Zoom does with breakout rooms, but you have like a lobby where, like a physical lobby where your guests, if they're showing up for meetings, are there, and you can put yourself in the lobby, and then you're connected on video. But it's 2D, it's very flat. And I think that as an initial step actually gives you a sense of space and location that is more useful than a $3,000 headset that everyone has to have with the right drivers, and your NVIDIA instead of mine's different, and it's not working with, you know, all that's got a long way to go.
Yeah, the great points. And also add that there's a not insignificant number of people for which VR headsets makes them nauseous. And I'm one of them. So when I hear people bring up VR like this, I literally, I get like sick. I'm like, oh no, I want to vomit. So I'm with Mark in I think 2D is enough for what we're talking about. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that the tools that we have for remote collaboration and for remote sprints are actually better than we're using them to be. Like, I still think there's a lot that we can do with the tool set that we have, that the VR isn't going to catapult us into somewhere where we need to be, but we can't get there without VR. I think with the tools we have, we can get a lot further. And this is, Mark and I, we're kind of crash test dummies for you guys, going out there and finding all these bugs and giving you this advice. This was learned the hard way, by the way. we didn't think through this stuff. We ran our heads into brick walls lots of times, that kind of thing. But I think our current tool set can do a lot more than it's actually doing. And I don't know if VR is going to solve anything, because a lot of the problem is a 2D problem. It's conceptual. It's words and pictures and that kind of thing. And then, the conceptual problem is multiple dimensions, right? Then it becomes a problem of sense making. And I don't know if VR is going to help your team make better decisions or make better sense of ideas and prototypes and things like that. And I think 2Ds probably get you there.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think keep it simple. I think a kiss or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I don't think we've got any more questions here. I just want to say a big thank you to you guys, also to the And Digital team here in London, in Covent Garden, for hosting us. And I gather maybe you're going to make this available as well for others. I think there's a lot of valuable content in there. If you can, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we put a link in the chat here. We put a link to the ebook, to some websites. I also do a survey every year I'd like for you guys to take. What I'll do, Mark, is I'll scrape all of those and I'll send them in an email there. And then if you could cascade that down to the folks there, then they would have all this goodness digitally. But we're happy to share this with you. Yeah.
Thanks again. It's been absolutely amazing, and we'll obviously fight the good corner here at Mural and fill out your surveys, and no doubt I think there'll be a few more people using it as well after this call.
Well, let us know, everybody, how you make out. We love to hear stories from the field.
Cool. All right. Thanks, and
Thank you.
bye. 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 Bye.